Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to begin by extending heartiest congratulations to Madam Gail Teixeira, Minister of Parliamentary Affairs, who had the opportunity to act as President on Monday, January 23rd. This honor, though brief, must not go unnoticed, as it underscores the heights to which women can aspire and attain. Bravo, Madam Teixeira. Mr. Speaker, I will now move to my remit to this House and the Guyanese public on Budget 2023, presented by Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashni Singh, under the theme, Improving Lives Today, Building Prosperity for Tomorrow. Budget 2023, Mr. Speaker, can be described as overwhelming in terms of length of delivery and underwhelming in content. The focus continues to weigh heavily on bricks and mortar, that is on physical infrastructure, and less on people and human development. The budget treats people as appendages and sideshows, rather than being integral to the development process. Lamentably, sir, rather than the goal of the massive spending being centered on improvement of the quantitative and qualitative lives of the people of this country, the budget seems to view people and poverty as irritants to be swatted not unlike an unbearing fly. Sir, Kaichor News, Friday 20th January 23, cites a recent FAO study titled Regional Overview of 2022 towards improving affordability of healthy diets. Mr. Speaker, before I go on, let me state that in the second paragraph of the foreword, it reads thus: statistics show that the prevalence of hunger in the region rose from 5.8% in 2015 to 8.6% in 2021. This prevalence is below the global average of 9.8% in 2021. Mr. Speaker, I highlight that to debunk what is being said on the other side, that this was a 2019 report. Mr. Speaker, what was stated that around 5% of Guyana's population is undernourished and a further 43% cannot afford a healthy diet. This report, coming on the heels of the recent World Bank report released in October 2022, paints a damning picture of the incompetence and uncaring attitude of the government. Although dropping from 61% in 2006 to 48% in 2019, poverty in Guyana remains unacceptably high. Mr. Speaker, anecdotal evidence indicates that the poverty rate worsened over the last 3 years, that the phenomenal overall growth in the economy has not been matched to a phenomenal growth in the standard of living of the majority of Guyanese. The lack of originality in Budget 2023, Mr. Speaker, is evident from the introduction, which bears an eerie resemblance to that of Budget 2018. Not complaining, just highlighting that appropriate recognition is due. There seems to be a familiar pattern, as for example, the recent signing of an operational agreement for the Natural Resource Fund without referencing that what was being signed was an updated version of the agreement signed in December 11, 2019 between the former Minister of Finance, Winston Jordan, and the governor. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 is not grounded in a medium to long-term development plan, nor a fiscal framework. The LCDS, sir, cannot be considered a long-term development plan. It is geared more towards monetizing Guyana's ecosystem. Nothing is wrong with that. It's just not a substitute for a development plan, especially given the magnitude of resources available. Without such a framework, the nation will continue to be confronted with nightmarish projects that reflect more the dream of one failed politician over the other. Mr. Speaker, our budget should be presented before the start of the financial year. As former Minister Jordan stated when presenting Budget 2017, the early presentation is a prerequisite for the budget to properly serve as an economic, financial, management, and accountability tool. This is even more important given the substantial increase in the size of the budget over the last 3 years. Although the Constitution provides for presentation no later than 90 days in the new financial year, this emergency measure has become the norm, except for the years under the coalition government. It is opposite to note that budgets presented after the year started caused tremendous stress on human and institutional capacity to execute projects and programs in the truncated period. That being said, sir, I now turn my attention to page 8 of the minister's presentation, GDP. While the economy has grown appreciably over the last 3 years, it has been attributed to the ramp-up production of oil. Allow me to share with you the growth of the economy when oil's contribution is stripped from the gross domestic product. During the years 2016 to 2019, the overall growth rate percentage ranged from 3.8 to 5.4%, while the non-oil growth rate ranged from 3.8 to 4.3%. However, the last 3 years, sir, 2020 to 2022, the overall growth rate percentage was 43.5%, 20.1%, and 62.3% respectively. And the non-oil growth rate percentage for those years were negative 7.3, 4.6, and 7.9 respectively. We are told by the minister in this budget that in 2023, overall growth rate is expected to be 25.1% and non-oil growth rate 7.9%. Mr. Speaker, I have just outlined that growth between 2016 to 2019 was more broad-based. The dominance of oil is reflected in the statistics of post-2019. From a modest 20% in 2019, oil's contribution to overall GDP growth rose sharply to 82% in 2022. Although it is budgeted to fall just under 70% in 2023, the medium-term outlook is for oil's contribution to rise well above 70% as more FPSOs are introduced and come on stream. We know these things, Minister. No need to behave like the government is Houdini. So, Mr. Speaker, while the government's propaganda machine is in overdrive to hoodwink the Guyanese people that we are the new Dubai, the non-oil sector, where the real economic and fiscal truth lies, paints a frightening picture. These frightening numbers tell us, Mr. Speaker, that the non-oil sector is in serious trouble. And as the regime dances in the carnival of corruption and waves the I withdraw, Mr. Speaker. And waves the GDP numbers while shouting fastest growing economy. Due to oil, it is carnage in the pots and bread baskets in the homes of the Guyanese people. I turn my attention, Mr. Speaker, to production. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 non-oil projections seem inconsistent with the global economic outlook described in Section 2, page 6 to 7 of the budget, as well as the historical performance of the key sectors. Section 2, paragraph 2.6 acknowledges the twin evils of declining prices of Guyana's main export commodities and the likelihood of global recession. Yet, the budget predicts substantial recovery in some sectors and massive growth in others. On the one hand, the budget paints a dismal external picture, but a glorious one domestically, as if Guyana is autarkic, totally divorced from the happenings externally. Mr. Speaker, allow me to share with this House. In 2019, we produced 92,256 tons of sugar. Last year, we produced 47,049, and the minister tells us that in 2023, we will produce 61,000 tons. Rice, Mr. Speaker, in 2019, we produced 682,080 tons of rice. Last year, sir, we produced 610,595. And the minister tells us that in 2023, we will produce 652,102. Bauxite, sir, in 2019, under the coalition government, we produced 1,631,451 tons. Last year, we barely made it to 706,634. And we are being told in this honorable House that this year we are going to produce some 775,884 tons. Mr. Speaker, looking at gold, in 2019, the declaration was 634,904 ounces. Last year, we barely scraped in 484,415 ounces. Nothing is stated for the projection of 2023. Sir, the figures just outlined show starkly that the 2023 budget projections for sugar, rice, bauxite, and gold will not meet 2019 achievements. In fact, Mr. Speaker, they will fall short by 34%, 4%, 52%, and 18% respectively. Since the goal projection for 2023 was not stated in the budget, it was assumed that output will increase by 7% in line with the percentage increase for the other mining sectors. Mr. Speaker, this massive infusion of cash in the sugar and rice sectors via the public sector investment program and direct cash transfers on the one hand, and the substantial fiscal and other incentives granted to the rice and gold sectors, including free fertilizer, removal of VAT, and duty-free fuel, have failed to stimulate output. Mr. Speaker, may I say it loud and clear that this budget is not the APNU-AFC budget, neither are the figures therein, so I turn to inflation. Mr. Speaker, nothing has been more characteristic of the mismanagement of the economy than the steep rise in inflation over the past 3 years compared to the previous 5 years. Allow me to highlight. Sir, between 2016 to 2019, the inflation rate was between 1.4% to 2.1%. During the years 2020 to 2022, we saw 0.9 to 7.2%. The minister tells us that in 2023, we will have a 3.8% inflation rate. Mr. Speaker, between 2021 and 2022, inflation averaged 6.5% compared to the previous 5 years average of 1.5%. Indicating that the average inflation for the past 2 years more than quadrupled the average average inflation recorded for the previous 5 years. Mr. Speaker, the already high overall inflation rates for 2021 to 2022 mask the true situation facing the poor and underclass in the country. It is well known in the economics literature that poor people tend to consume most of their meager income on food and shelter. Sir, Stabrook News, January 14, 2023, provides evidence of widespread increase in prices from December 2021 to December 2022 in basic foods, all produced locally. Mr. Speaker, I am not going to remind this House that a bottle of Bora increased from 2021 December to 2022 by 183%, that Bolonje rose by 150%, that cabbage rose by 130%, and the list goes on. Mr. Speaker, eggs, Mr. Eggs. You used to buy 3 for $100. Now you cannot even get 2 for $100 because of the 2% increase. Sir, with wage increase in the past 2 years, failing to compensate for the rise in inflation, Mr. Speaker, it is easy to understand why poverty and extreme poverty are high and rising, and why more than 40% of the population cannot afford a balanced and nutritious meal. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the deficit. I acknowledge that COVID and the war in Ukraine disrupted the supply chain of goods and services and contributed to the rise in domestic inflation and uninitiated contributed increase in the money supply, occasioned largely by the rapid public expenditure. Mr. Speaker, public expenditure 291.6 with a central government deficit of $29.9 billion. Last year, sir, it was $615.2 billion for total expenditure, with a central government deficit of $155.5 billion. The minister tells us that 2023 total expenditure will be $781.9 billion Guyana dollars, and the central government deficit will be $167.6 billion, some 11.5%, sir, of non-GDP. There is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that the absolute size of the budget has grown appreciably since 2019, from 291 to 1.9 billion in 2023, 168%. In expenditure between 2020 and 2022 was 111%. However, that ramped up expenditure was able to generate a tepid average real non-oil growth of 2.9%. This was less than the real non-oil average growth recorded for the previous, where the coalition government had considerably less resources to manage the economy. Mr. Speaker, capital expenditure plays a critical role in advancing an economy. Indeed, capital investment should contribute to economic growth and higher standards of living through its linkage with labor productivity. So, not only is size important, but also quality matters, thus underscoring the need for these to be kept in sharp focus. Sir, the availability of oil resources, the government with the availability of oil resources, the government has ramped up capital spending. The 104 to 222 in the best circumstances would have been challenges. In circumstances where the implementation window has been reduced 10 months, in an environment of shortages of the 4 M's, sir, shortage of manpower, shortage of materials, shortage of machinery, and shortage of management, where corruption in the public procurement and implementation process abounds, where every
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, point of order.
Mr. Speaker, am I to understand that you can't say the word corruption in this House anymore?
Yes, you can. You
Because
can. Unparliamentary.
it is unparliamentary to use the word corruption.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
No, Mr. Speaker, could I clarify? As I understand it, if you say somebody is corrupt, you say that's honorable member is corrupt, it's unparliamentary. But
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, I will deal with this after the current speaker concludes her presentation. As of now, unparliamentary. Beep. And I trust that the Honorable Member, Mr. Duncan, didn't patent beep.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where evidence of crumbling infrastructure, including roads and bridges, proliferate, it is doubtful that the objectives of the capital program will be achieved. In fact, conservative estimates put 20 to 25% of the PSIP in jeopardy through bleep. Bigger is not necessarily better. We must never put quality over quantity. Budget 2023 repeats the mantra like previous budgets, Mr. Speaker. It is fully financed without an increase in taxes. Point to note, all budgets are fully financed since projected expenditure must match projected revenue. Whether these are garnered by taxes and other imposts, borrowing, or printing of money, sir. Mr. Speaker, the rapid growth in the size of the budget is also reflected in massive growth in the absolute and relative sizes of the central government deficit. From a nominal deficit of 29.1 billion in 2019, the central government deficit ballooned to 155.5 billion in 2022, an increase of 420%, sir. This deficit is projected to rise further to $167.6 billion in 2023, or 7.8% more than in 2022. And sir, 460% above that recorded for 2029 under the coalition government. Mr. Speaker, since deficits add to the public debt, then over the period 2020 to 2023, Guyanese people, listen to this. This government would have added over $500 billion, some US $2.5 billion to the public debt. In terms of the relative central government deficit, sir, this has increased more than fourfold between 2019 and 2022. Mr. Speaker, rising from a modest and manageable 2.9% of non-oil GDP in 2019 to 11.8% of non-oil GDP in 2022. I now turn my attention to debt management. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 speaks to prudent management of the public debt. That though the debt rose by 16.9% in 2022 to reach US $3,654.9 million, see page 18, section 3.4. The increase is not surprising, given the immediately preceding discussion. Sir, the government's eschewing the use of the burgeoning Natural Resource Fund in preference to borrowing from any and all sources, on the assumption that oil prices will remain high, thus allowing easy repayment of loans taken today. Sir, they are falling into the same trap as did Ghana and Nigeria, for example. Mr. Speaker, it is instructive to note, we look at our public and publicly guaranteed debt between the period 2018 to 2023. Sir, in 2018, it totaled 1.792 billion US dollars, with the external component being 1.322. In 2022, it amounted to 3.653 billion US dollars, with an external component of 1.572. Sir, the minister tells us that in 2023, that it would amount to 4.461 billion US dollars, with an external component of 2.146 billion US dollars. The external public debt, sir, has risen steadily since the PPPC was installed into office in August 2020, rising from US $1.32 billion in 2020 to a projected US $2.146 billion in 2023, or 62%. The country's exposure has swung from borrowing from multilateral financial institutions, principally the IDB, World Bank, CDB, etc., to bilateral countries. Any collapse in oil prices, Mr. Speaker, will leave the country dangerously exposed to situations not unlike what happened in Sri Lanka and Uganda. Sir, I now look at balance of payments. Mr. Speaker, developments in the balance of payments mirror the performance in the rest of the economy. Oil dominates the export receipts of the country in an indecent manner. Sir, it is instructive to note our merchandise export for 2019 was 1,587 million US dollars. Sir, since the first oil in December 2019, oil's contribution to export earnings from merchandise has risen sharply from 41.1% in 2020 to 87.5% last year, and expected to maintain this very high share in 2023. When you compare it to 2019, when non-oil exports contributed to all the merchandise exports receipts of the country, Mr. Speaker, oil exports have crowded out the non-oil exports in a very dramatic fashion. So for all the talk of spending to avoid the Dutch disease, all the talk of focusing on agriculture and achieving 25% reduction in food import bill by 2025, the evidence, Mr. Speaker, indicates that the government's policies are having little to no effect on diversifying the economy. Let us look at our non-oil exports in 2019, 1,567, and in 2022, 1,425. In 2023, we are told that we will meet 1,644. Mr. Speaker, these figures indicate that since 2019, earnings from non-oil merchandise exports have not been matched or surpassed. In 2019, such earnings was US 1,567 million. But these decline in the next 2 years before recovering slightly in 2022. The projection that these earnings in 2023 will surpass those of 2019 for the first time cannot be upheld to the scrutiny of Budget 2023's predictions. of falling commodity prices and likely global recession. The minister told us that the economy could be so quickly caught in the jaws of the oil sector is frightening, as the fragility on which the economy's transformation is being undertaken, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my time is limited, hence I must move on, and I turn to the budget measure.
Honorable member, for you to move on, we will have to extend your time.
Thank you, Comrade Speaker. I move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Whip. Honorable member, you may continue to conclude in 5
Mr.
minutes.
Speaker. Perhaps the measures are the most underwhelming or ineffectual part of the budget, sir. Some measures will have no impact on the current situation, Mr. Speaker, as they are merely being continued. As such, their benefits are already being enjoyed. These measures relate to the maintenance of zero excise tax on fuel and the use of pre-COVID rates for the calculation of applicable custom duties and taxes. Some measures, Mr. Speaker, will be of little to no interest to the poor and low-income earners. These relate to removal of VAT on electric vehicles. Ha ha! And the increase in the mortgage ceiling to $20 million. Oh, Mr. Speaker, which poor person can afford a loan of such magnitude? Thousands of house lots have been distributed over the last 2 years, yet many of them remain empty, growing grass and vermin because of the inability of owners to access bank financing. The removal of VAT on the sale of residential properties is hard to fathom at this time and appears contradictory. On the one hand, incentives are provided to boost the capital stock. On the other, valuable income is being transferred to the rich for dealing in sale of properties. May I remind the government that this act has been flagged under the anti-money laundering regulations as having a high potential for laundering illicit proceeds. Mr. Speaker, in lieu of a publicly functioning public transport system, the government continues to incentivize individual ownership of vehicles. Nothing is wrong with that. But, sir, this has a very high tax on the country's foreign exchange supply, and more importantly is the gridlock that has been created by the massive importation of vehicles within a deficit-laden and highly compromised road transportation network. Mr. Speaker, this is hard evidence. We experience it every day. I surely believe that the government can give some reconsideration in this area. The fiddling of the income tax threshold every year is anthema to any proper tax system. Since coming into office, sir, the government has changed the threshold twice in 2 years, suggesting that they have no comprehensive tax reform in mind, sir. In 2017 budget, the coalition government introduced a radical measure to the income tax, increasing the tax threshold to the greater of $720,000 or 1/3 of the employee's salary. Budget 2023's proposal to raise the threshold to $1,020,000 or $85,000 per month is as mean-spirited as it is ill-thought. With the current minimum wage at $80,892, a 5% increase in salary in 2023, sir, would effectively wipe out any potential benefit this measure was meant to give. Sir, in fact, a 6% increase would see $745 of the new minimum wage being subjected to 28% tax. Second, because of the 1/3 income that is already granted as a free income tax allowance, those currently earning in excess of $255,000 will not be impacted by this threshold increase. Many of the members of the discipline services and the health sector who are beneficiaries of the elevated salaries payable from January 1st will not be amused with this threshold change. Mr. Speaker, with the level of withdrawal expected from the NRF, the government could have moved the threshold to at least $150,000 while keeping the 1/3 of gross income. Sir, in wrapping up, let me say, sir, that I am surely grateful for this opportunity to represent the many Guyanese people and my party in this debate on the 2023 budget. And I also take this opportunity to thank all of our public servants who contributed to the preparation of this budget and estimates. As I leave, sir, allow me to share this quote from Nelson Mandela. He said, and I quote, "A fundamental concern individual and community lives would go a long way in making the world a better place we so passionately dreamt of." End of quote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.